The night gathers around us like an ancient animal, breathing slowly against the stones of this tower. And I tell you that the veil which separates the seen from the unseen has thinned to a perilous translucence. You feel it, perhaps more sharply than the others who move through the world as though it were still bound by the old rules. You feel a pressure at the edge of your dreams, a silent trembling beneath your ribs, a subtle shift in the rhythm of the days as the year crawls toward its final threshold, and you believe it is anxiety, or fatigue, or the residue of unresolved wounds. But no, what you sense is the murmur of the unconscious as it rearranges itself for the turning of an aeon. The empath always hears the whisper of the world before the world itself understands what it is becoming. You are not merely sensitive, you are a sentinel stationed at the border between epochs, absorbing the tremors of the coming great separation long before the rest awaken to its magnitude. Sit with this truth. Though it may unsettle you, you feel the suffering of others, not because you are weak, but because your psyche was fashioned with porous boundaries that the collective unconscious uses as an instrument. The empath is often born into families and societies that cannot understand the precision of such perception, and so you have been taught to interpret your attunement as fragility, to diminish your instincts and apologize for your depth. Yet tonight, in the cold of this ancient tower, I tell you that your sensitivity is not a defect, but a summons. The unconscious has always used certain souls as barometers, and as the final days of this year unravel, it is you, more than others, who feel the unbearable weight of truth no one else has the courage to acknowledge. But you are tired, exhausted in a way that sleep cannot remedy. Your bones feel hollowed by the demands of others. Your heart feels scraped by the needs you have carried. This is not merely stress. This is the dying breath of a persona you have worn for too many years, a mask that has cracked, its fractures illuminated by the dimming light of the year's end. The nice persona, that carefully crafted facade of kindness, patience, self-sacrifice, and unceasing availability, has begun to collapse under the weight of its own falsehood. You have mistaken this collapse for personal failure, but it is not you who is collapsing, it is the mask. The unconscious destroys every lie eventually, especially those lies we call virtues. Allow yourself to see what is truly happening. The nice persona was never kindness. It was an unconscious defense, constructed to ensure belonging in environments unable to receive your depth. As a child, you learned that your emotional intelligence made others uncomfortable, that your perceptions exposed dynamics no one wished to see, that your sensitivity disrupted the collective denial, and so you dimmed your perception, you cultivated agreeable expressions, you learned to soothe others' fears at the cost of your own authenticity. You smiled to prevent rupture. You apologized to maintain peace. You offered your time, your energy, your empathy, even when no one offered you the dignity of reciprocity. But the persona is not the self. It is merely the garment we wear to navigate the world of collective expectation. And when the persona becomes too rigid, too performative, too detached from the truth of the inner being, it suffocates its wearer. This is the exhaustion you feel. The soul can no longer tolerate the burden of maintaining an identity that was never your own. The unconscious is demanding rupture. It is shaking the scaffolding. And you, empathic one, are sensing this internal earthquake long before the outer world reflects its consequences. You have lived most of your life entrapped within two archetypal patterns that the empathic psyche gravitates toward with fatal consistency. The first is the savior. The second is the mirror. Tonight we must examine both, for they are the unseen architects of your suffering and the very forces that will endanger you as the new aeon approaches. The savior archetype seduces the empath with an illusion of nobility. It tells you that your purpose is to heal, that your worth is measured by the wounds you can mend, that your identity is secured only when others are leaning upon you. Yet beneath this noble veneer lies a profound evasion of your own shadow. For if you are always rescuing another, you never descend into your own abyss. The Savior protects you from confronting the darkness that dwells in your depths, the anger you were forbidden to feel, the boundaries you were punished for asserting, the loneliness you were taught to swallow in silence. And so you build your identity on the suffering of others, secretly hoping that if you save them, someone will finally come to save you. But salvation is not relational, it is intrapsychic. No one can rescue you from the labyrinth that is your own psyche. And every attempt to rescue others is, in truth, a deflection from the work demanded of your own individuation. The savior complex becomes a splendid distraction, a perpetual outward gaze that shields you from the internal reckoning the unconscious refuses to postpone indefinitely. The world you heal becomes a substitute for the world within you that remains unhealed. And then there is the mirror, perhaps the more dangerous of the two. The empathic psyche is naturally reflective. You do not merely observe the emotions of others, you absorb them into your psychic field. You bend your shape to accommodate their fear, their rage, their sorrow, their emptiness. You become a vessel for what they cannot hold. It is a noble instinct, yet also profoundly destructive. For the mirror archetype teaches you to lose yourself in the tidal waves of others' unconscious projections. You become an extension of their unresolved wounds, a receptacle for their disowned shadow, a balm for their unspoken grief. In the end, you no longer know which emotions are your own. Your identity dissolves into a vague, amorphous offering to the world, a psychic sponge soaked with the pain of countless souls who never once wondered about the cost of your generosity. The mirror is not kindness. It is self-erasure masquerading as compassion. When you reflect the world too well, you eventually forget the shape of your own face. You believe that your exhaustion is the result of giving too much, but it is more accurate to say that you have given from a place of chronic self-abandonment. You have carried burdens that were never yours to carry, entered battles that were never yours to fight, and answered questions that were never yours to resolve. The unconscious demands balance. Every act of excessive giving creates a pressure within the psyche, and eventually the neglected self revolts. It withdraws its energy. It refuses to animate the persona any longer. And you mistake this revolt for collapse, when in truth it is a rebirth, one that terrifies you because it threatens every identity you have relied upon to survive. The dying of the nice persona is not a tragedy, it is a liberation, yet liberation always arrives with a shadow. And the danger is that you will cling to the dying mask out of fear. The year ahead, this unsettling transition toward the aeon of separation, will amplify every conflict between the true self and the persona. For what is approaching is a collective confrontation with authenticity. Illusions are dissolving at a pace the psyche finds unbearable. Masks are cracking. Hidden motivations are emerging. The unconscious refuses to be ignored. And those who enter this new aeon with a fragile or false persona will not withstand the psychic storms that follow. I must warn you with the gravity of a man who has spent his life watching the unconscious dismantle empires, both personal and collective. If you carry the savior or the mirror into the coming year as your primary identity, you will be swept into the chaos of other people's unprocessed darkness. You will mistake their crises for your responsibility. You will drown in the emotional debris of those who have never done their own inner work. The unconscious is merciless with those who refuse to evolve. And you, empath, sentinel, listener at the threshold, cannot afford the luxury of remaining who you have been. You stand at a crossroads tonight, in this dim light, with the lake outside dark and silent as a forgotten god. One path leads back into the familiar suffering of the nice persona. The savior, the mirror, the endless spiral of carrying what is not yours. The other leads into the unknown terrain of your authentic self, where boundaries become sacred, where your life force is reclaimed from those who have fed upon it, where you no longer exist as an emotional vessel for the unconscious of others, but as a sovereign being rooted in your own depths. The year is ending, the veil is thinning, and the unconscious is calling your name with a force that cannot be ignored. The night deepens, and as we sit here in the stone womb of Bollingen, I feel the collective weight of the unspoken pressing upon your chest. You sense it too, the psychic tension of an approaching threshold, as if the air itself were charged with the residue of unmade decisions. Part of you wishes to turn away from this inner summons, to retreat into the familiar posture of the agreeable self, the ever-giving soul who shields others from the storms they have invoked by their own unconscious choices. Yet another part of you, ancient, sovereign, incorruptible, has begun to stir. It trembles like a serpent waking beneath the earth, demanding that you finally acknowledge the division within your own being. This is where the real work begins. For the empath must confront the one truth they avoid most fervently. The world you have tried to protect is not the world you belong to. There is a reason why you feel the ache of endings before the rest of humanity sees even the faintest signs. You are attuned not merely to emotions, but to patterns, to the shifting architecture of the collective psyche. As the year leans toward its final descent, you feel not only personal exhaustion, but a great unraveling in the field of consciousness itself. The empath senses the collapse of illusions as if they were cracks spreading across their own ribs. You are not imagining this. You are not overreacting. You are witnessing the dissolution of narratives the world has clung to for decades. And because your psyche was never designed to ignore the truth, the tension of this dissolution accumulates within you long before it becomes visible in the outer world. Yet, I must tell you something that may sting. Much of your present suffering arises not from what you feel, but from what you refuse to acknowledge within yourself. You still cling to the nice persona as though it were a moral imperative, a sacred emblem of your identity. You believe that if you release it, you will become cold, selfish, unrecognizable. You fear that without this persona, no one will love you, no one will stay, no one will understand what you truly are. This is the tragedy of the empath. You have mistaken compliance for compassion, self-erasure for virtue, silence for harmony. You were conditioned to believe that your worth is proportional to your ability to minimize your own needs. The unconscious does not tolerate such distortions indefinitely. When the persona strays too far from the truth of the self, the psyche begins its rebellion. What you call burnout is not merely fatigue, it is an antiodromia, the turning of a thing into its opposite. Your excessive kindness becomes resentment. Your endless giving becomes depletion. Your patience becomes a subtle form of rage. And because you have spent years refusing to acknowledge these darker emotions, they now rise with an intensity that frightens you. But I tell you, these emotions are not your enemy. They are the guardians of your authenticity, returning at last to reclaim what you surrendered. You must understand that the nice persona was never innocent. It was a strategic adaptation forged in the fires of childhood, when your survival depended on being pleasing, gentle, predictable, unthreatening. The persona carried you through situations where your true self would not have been accepted. It served its purpose. It deserves gratitude. But it is not your destiny. If you insist on carrying it into 2026, the weight of that mask will crush you from within. The unconscious demands evolution. And those who resist will experience psychic fragmentation as the world around them accelerates into its next phase. Let us return to the archetypes that ensnare you, for they are not yet done revealing their influence. The savior within you is subtle. It tells you that you must be the balm for every wounded soul, the anchor for every drifting heart, the stabilizing force for those who refuse to stabilize themselves. The Savior convinces you that your love must be unconditional, your patience infinite, your presence always available. But beneath this apparent benevolence lies a deeper fear, that if you do not heal others, you will be forced to confront the emptiness within your own psyche. You have used compassion as a shield. You have built an identity around being useful. needed, indispensable, but the unconscious sees through such strategies. When you heal others to avoid healing yourself, your gift becomes corruption. You entangle yourself in patterns that drain your vitality and distort your fate. The savior archetype turns you into an emotional martyr, carrying the burdens of others as though this were proof of your spiritual worth. Yet, this is not individuation, it is spiritual codependence, the refusal to stand alone. And then there is the mirror, a far more insidious prison. When you mirror the emotions of others, you abandon your own emotional sovereignty. You become what they need you to be. You shape-shift into comfort, into understanding, into forgiveness, into silence. Your identity becomes fluid, dissolving whenever another's suffering enters your field. This is why you feel lost, why your sense of self flickers like a candle in the wind. You have become so accustomed to reflecting others that you no longer recognize your own reflection. You stand before the mirror and see not your face, but the imprint of countless psychic projections. The mirror archetype is the most dangerous for the empath because it masquerades as love. But love without identity is not love, it is sacrifice without meaning. When you mirror others without anchoring yourself in your own depths, you become susceptible to manipulation, exploitation, and unconscious absorption of energies that do not belong to you. And as the collective unconscious enters a period of turmoil and reorganization, the emotional field around you will become increasingly volatile. If you enter this new phase without boundaries, you will be swept into the psychic turbulence of others and drowned in emotional debris that has nothing to do with your own inner work. Listen to me with utmost seriousness. The world you are stepping into is not the world you have known. The psychological landscape is changing. The structures that once provided stability are dissolving, and the collective psyche is approaching a threshold of confrontation. The Great Separation is not merely an external event, but an interior division, a sorting of identities, values, and psychic alignments. Those who have relied on false personas will find themselves disoriented, vulnerable, and overwhelmed. Those who have suppressed their shadow will be consumed by it. And those who cling to outdated roles, especially the role of the emotional caretaker, will be swept into a vortex of others' unprocessed darkness. This is why I warn you. Entering 2026 with the old identity of the empath is not merely unwise, it is dangerous. You cannot continue to carry the emotional weight of the world. You cannot sustain the role of the universal healer. You cannot afford to remain the mirror for those who refuse to see themselves. The unconscious demands that you reclaim your autonomy. It demands that you differentiate your emotions from the emotions of others. It demands that you walk away from the savior role and confront the emptiness it has been masking. You must face your own shadow, for it is the gatekeeper of your power. There is a truth you have been avoiding, a truth that now rises like a dark moon on the horizon of your psyche. You cannot save anyone who is determined to remain asleep. The empath's suffering intensifies not because the world grows darker, but because you refuse to stop carrying those who have chosen their suffering Let the mask fall. Let the persona dissolve. Let the savior retire from its endless labor. Let the mirror crack so that your true face might be revealed. The unconscious is calling you not to service, not to sacrifice, but to sovereignty. You must learn the ancient art of psychic separation, of discerning what belongs to you and what belongs to others. If you fail to do this, the storms of the coming years will pull you into the undertow of collective fear. The year ends, and with it ends a chapter of your identity. You must decide whether you will continue to live as a reflection or whether you will finally step into the light of your own being. The wind shifts outside the tower, carrying with it the quiet groan of the lake, as if some ancient presence beneath its surface were turning in its sleep. You feel this movement not with your ears, but with the subtle membranes of the psyche, the deep animal instinct that senses change long before the intellect interprets it. And so we continue, for part 3 is the descent into the chamber of truth you have avoided for many years. Here we step into the nucleus of your suffering, the place where your empathy became a wound rather than a gift, where your light became a lure for those who hungered not for healing but for a vessel to pour their unconscious chaos into. This is the place you must enter before the aeon turns. For what lies ahead will not permit any soul to remain undefined. You have spent much of your life attempting to justify your sensitivity to a world that rewards numbness. You have tried to explain your depth to those who fear their own. You have offered tenderness to those who interpreted it as weakness. You have given understanding to those who felt entitled to it, as though your empathy were an inexhaustible spring. This has created in you a subtle but profound fracture, a belief that your emotional intelligence must be offered freely, unconditionally, even recklessly. You fear that if you withhold it, you will lose connection. But this fear is an illusion crafted by the persona that is now dying. The truth you must confront is this: your empathy is not universal currency. It is a sacred resource. When you give indiscriminately, you violate the integrity of your own psychological ecosystem. You allow energies to enter that do not resonate with your inner pattern. You contaminate your field with the unresolved conflicts of others. The empath becomes wounded not by feeling deeply, but by having no boundary around that depth. Your lack of boundaries was not a conscious choice. It was a survival strategy. As a child, you learned to scan emotional environments with the precision of a radar, reading subtle cues, anticipating conflict, softening your presence to avoid triggering the volatility of others. You adapted brilliantly, too brilliantly. The very skill that protected you then is suffocating you now. Hyper-attunement becomes hyper-vigilance. Compassion becomes self-sacrifice. Intuition becomes over-identification. What was once adaptive becomes pathological when extended beyond its original purpose. And yet, even now, you hesitate to reclaim your boundaries because you fear the consequences of disappointing others. You fear being misunderstood. You fear being perceived as cold. You fear the withdrawal of love, of approval, of belonging. These fears are the chains that bind the empath to the persona. They are the reasons you accept relationships that drain you, workloads that shatter you, conversations that deplete you, demands that steal your life force grain by grain. But hear me clearly. The unconscious cares nothing for the expectations of others. It demands only that you become who you truly are. And who you are cannot emerge while you remain imprisoned by the emotional gravity of those who take without giving, who expect without reciprocating, who collapse into you without any intention of standing on their own feet. This brings us to a crucial revelation. Not everyone who comes to you in pain is seeking healing. Many seek containment. They want not transformation, but absorption. They want a psychic sponge to soak the unbearable aspects of their own shadow so they do not have to face them. The empath becomes their unconscious dumping ground, a graveyard of unresolved emotions. This is not healing. It is parasitism disguised as vulnerability. Your exhaustion is not the symptom of too much feeling, it is the symptom of too much taking. You have become a sanctuary for the displaced shadows of others, and now your psyche is overrun with ghosts that do not belong to you. The mirror archetype, when unchecked, attracts those who do not wish to see themselves. They gravitate toward your light because it allows them to avoid the confrontation with their own darkness. When you reflect their emotions, you relieve them temporarily, but you also reinforce their avoidance. This is why your relationships feel imbalanced, why your connections feel asymmetrical, why you often feel unseen even when you are constantly looking deeply into others. No one sees the mirror, they only see themselves, and so you drift through life holding the emotions of the world while receiving almost none of its understanding in return. This asymmetry is what has hollowed you. It is what has made you feel invisible. The world has benefited enormously from your empathy, but it has not yet learned to honor it. The time has come for you to understand the price of continuing like this. The great turning of 2025, 2026 will magnify the emotional shadows of humanity. Fear will intensify. Denial will intensify. Projection will intensify. People will cling more desperately to illusions because their unconscious content will erupt with unprecedented force. Those who have not done their inner work will become volatile containers of psychic debris. They will seek empaths instinctively, not for healing, but for refuge from themselves. If you maintain your nice persona, your savior identity, your mirror adaptability, you will become overwhelmed by energies that were never yours to bear. But the deeper danger is subtler. When you absorb the shadows of others during a collective crisis, you lose the ability to discern your own destiny. Your life path becomes muddied by the emotional residue of the people you carry. The unconscious does not distinguish between what is yours and what is taken into your field. It integrates all of it. This is why you have felt confusion around your purpose. This is why your intuition has become clouded. This is why your inner voice has grown faint. The clarity of yourself has been drowned in the noise of foreign psychic material. If you step into the new aeon in this condition, you will not be navigating your own life, you will be navigating the karmic debris of others. This is psychic entanglement. This is spiritual suffocation. This is the death of individuation. Do you understand now why your exhaustion has become chronic? Why your relationships have become labyrinths? Why your heart feels trapped between longing and dread? It is because the unconscious is forcing you toward a confrontation with the one truth you have always resisted. You must detach, not from love, not from humanity, not from compassion, but from the identities that have bound you to suffering. The Savior must die so that the sovereign may rise. The mirror must shatter so that the self may appear. The nice persona must fall away so that the authentic, unyielding, luminous core of your being can finally breathe. To shed these identities is not cruelty. It is maturation. It is the end of childhood. It is the beginning of true power. But hear this with the gravity it deserves. Transformation is a violent process. The unconscious dismantles lies with a brutality that feels personal, even though it is the most impersonal force in existence. When you resist, you suffer. When you cling, you fracture. When you deny, you drown in the very emotions you are trying to escape. The empath suffers most when they attempt to maintain harmony where truth demands rupture. This is why the year now ending has felt like a slow collapse. The unconscious has been stripping away illusions layer by layer. It has been dismantling relationships that were built on imbalance, on projection, on fantasy. It has been exposing the manipulations you once overlooked. It has been revealing the motives behind the behaviors of those who took your kindness as an invitation to feed. None of this is a punishment. It is a revelation. It is the prelude to individuation. If you allow this process to continue, if you surrender to what must be released, your empathy will transform into something unrecognizable. No longer a wound, no longer a siphon, no longer an obligation. It will become a force, a clarity, a boundary that does not require explanation, a presence that cannot be manipulated. But if you resist, if you cling to the Savior and mirror identities, the chaos of the coming aeon will devour your light. You will be pulled into battles that are not yours, drained by wounds that are not yours, broken by destinies that are not yours. You must choose now, empath, before the veil closes and the year gives birth to a more ruthless dawn. The flame before us wavers, bowing to a draught that enters the tower like a whispered omen. And I feel the collective unconscious pressing against the walls of this room. You feel it too, the tightening coil, the deepening silence, the presence of something vast approaching. We have traveled far into the labyrinth together, and now part 4 leads us to the threshold of transformation itself. The empath cannot continue into the next aeon with an identity shaped by wounds, by survival adaptations, by emotional servitude. You stand tonight not at the end of your strength, but at the end of your illusion. And endings of this nature always arrive disguised as exhaustion. Your fatigue is not a malfunction. It is initiation. It is the unconscious withdrawing energy from every false structure of your life. When the psyche prepares for metamorphosis, it drains vitality from the persona, from the relationships that no longer serve individuation, from the roles that have chained you to mediocrity and self-erasure. This depletion is the precursor to renewal. It is the clearing of space, the dismantling of the scaffolding, the burning of what has become too small for your emerging self. But hear me carefully. The unconscious does not destroy without also demanding responsibility. As the aeon turns, it will not be enough to simply shed the nice persona. You must also assume the burden of sovereignty, and sovereignty is far more demanding than sacrifice. The Savior carries others because it is easier than carrying oneself. The mirror reflects others because it is less frightening than seeing one's true face. These identities gave you belonging, sovereignty gives you solitude. These identities made you liked, sovereignty makes you free, and freedom is more terrifying than captivity, especially for one who has spent years defining themselves through the emotional gravity of others. Tonight, I must bring you into contact with a truth that completes this magnum opus. The empath must become a boundary, not a wall, not a barrier, not a fortress of defensiveness, but a conscious, living threshold that guards the sanctity of your inner world. Without inner boundaries, your empathy becomes a wound. With boundaries, your empathy becomes wisdom. This requires a psychological reversal so profound that your old self will interpret it as betrayal. You will begin to say no where you once said yes. You will cease to explain yourself to those who never listened. You will stop softening your tone to protect fragile egos. You will withdraw from those who feed on your emotional labor. You will feel an instinctual recoil from relationships built on unspoken contracts of chronic self-sacrifice. You will become less available, less predictable, less malleable, and the world will not like this. The ones who depended on your pliability will call you cold. The ones who fed upon your forgiveness will call you selfish. The ones who relied on your silence will call you changed. Let them speak, for they are mourning not your absence, but the death of their access to your energy. This is the great separation, not an event, not an apocalypse, a psychic sorting between the ones who evolve and the ones who refuse, between the souls who walk toward the self and the souls who cling to their persona, between those who do their inner work and those who outsource it to the empath, between those who confront their shadow and those who cast it onto you. You were never meant to absorb their projections. You were meant to perceive them, reflect upon them, and return them to their rightful owner without attachment. This is what empathy becomes after individuation, not absorption, but awareness. The empath who continues to absorb will perish in the new aeon. The empath who learns to witness will rise, but you cannot witness clearly until you commit to an inner separation as well. You must separate yourself from the unconscious longing to be needed. The savior archetype has woven a seductive promise through your psyche that your worth is guaranteed if you are indispensable. but indispensability is a spiritual trap. When others depend on you for their emotional stability, you are not loved, you are used. When they collapse into your arms without learning to stand on their own, you are not valued, you are convenient. When you are the one they call during crisis but forget during calm, you are not honored, you are a container for their imbalance. Your destiny is not to be a container, your destiny is to become a vessel. A container holds what is poured into it, regardless of its nature. A vessel receives only what aligns with its purpose and allows all else to pass. A container is passive. A vessel is conscious. A container is filled by others. A vessel chooses what enters. This distinction will define your survival in 2026 and beyond. You must shift from reflection to radiance, from emotional absorption to psychic autonomy, from involuntary empathy to intentional awareness. This is the metamorphosis of the empath, but metamorphosis requires death. The savior must die so that the sovereign can take form. The mirror must die so that the oracle can speak. The nice persona must die so that the self may live. Do not misunderstand me. The empath is not evolving into coldness. You are evolving into clarity. You will still feel deeply, but you will no longer drown. You will still care, but you will no longer carry. You will still understand others, but you will no longer abandon yourself for that understanding. You will still be open, but no longer pause. Your empathy will become discerning, precise, almost surgical. This is what true psychological maturity looks like, not the soft blur of unconditional acceptance, but the sharp line of conscious presence. Conscious presence is intolerable to those who rely on your unconscious submission. This is why your transformation will trigger conflict. When you stop serving as a mirror, people will see their own distorted reflection and blame you for the discomfort. When you stop playing savior, they will accuse you of having changed, of being selfish, of abandoning them. But do not be deceived by their words. They are not grieving your transformation, they are grieving the loss of their control. The great separation is not merely between you and others. It is between your old self and your emerging self, between your conditioned identity and your innate identity, between the person you were expected to be and the being you were born to become. This requires courage, more courage than you have ever been asked to summon. To become conscious is to walk alone at first. To enter the self is to risk the collapse of everything that is not aligned with your inner truth. Individuation demands sacrifice, not of others, but of illusions, even those illusions that once protected you. And so tonight, let me speak the final truth that the unconscious has been urging you to accept. Your life is not a sanctuary for the wounded who refuse to heal. Your life is an arena for your own psychological evolution. The empath who transforms becomes a guide not through rescue, but through embodiment, not through emotional labor, but through clarity of being. Your presence becomes a mirror of truth rather than a sponge for suffering. Your energy becomes a boundary rather than a well. Your empathy becomes a compass rather than a trap. This is the empath's true destiny, not to feel everything, but to perceive the meaning within the feeling, not to carry others, but to illuminate their path by walking your own, not to dissolve into emotional landscapes, but to navigate them with the precision of a conscious traveler. When you step into 2026, you must do so with the understanding that the era of unconscious empathy is over. The time of spiritual absorption is over. The time of emotional martyrdom is over. If you continue with the old identity, you will be torn apart by the psychic turbulence of the world. But if you cross the threshold as your emerging self, as the sovereign empath, you will not merely survive the new aeon. You will shape it. The veil thins, the year closes. The unconscious waits. You are no longer here to serve the collective's wounds. You are here to awaken, and awakening, my dear empath, begins the moment you stop betraying yourself.